Hi everyone, Pinnacle of Glory here. Thank you for being with me. This is Fyodor Dostoyevsky's Notes from the Underground. I just finished this book maybe 1 hour ago, and it's actually a relatively short book. The Penguin Classic Edition is 123 pages. I spent more time setting it down after a couple of pages of reading just to take a moment and really drink in what I had just read and ponder it because the precision, Dostoevsky, I mean, so far he's never missed. He's, I don't even know what I would classify him as. He's a master psychologist. That's all I can say. And he is merciless when it comes to matters of the heart. And so this book is about a man who's in his 40s. It takes place in the 19th century in Russia. It's a man who's in his 40s, early 40s, and he's reminiscing over, his life. And it's broken up into two sections. The first section is 30, 40 pages. He's kind of giving his philosophy on life. And the second section, he goes into more particular stories. So it goes from the general to the particular. I actually want to read a section of this. I'm not going to spoil too much, but it gives you a general feel for what to expect. These are the sort of brutal truths that I've come to expect from Dostoevsky, and I've come to appreciate as well. So he says, in every man's remembrances, there are things he will not reveal to everybody, but only to his friends. There are other things he will not reveal even to his friends, but only to himself. And then, only under a pledge of secrecy. Finally, there are some things that a man is afraid to reveal even to himself, and any honest man accumulates a pretty fair number of such things. That is to say, the more respectable a man is, the more of them he has. That, I love that. I adore that. That is just potent. And that sums up, there's a lot of that in the first section. And the other standout thing in the first section to me, this man, he's just describing himself and his life, going off about his spitefulness, his pettiness, his general self-awareness of how awful he can be, and how he has these elucidations of the light breaks through briefly, and he chooses to quench it and just stay in the dark. The underground, his self-imposed exile from society. He goes off about how men of action are these low-thinking, fleshly, carnal beasts, and he's got this intellect, but he acknowledges his weakness as being that of overthinking. And I think he takes a shot at Socrates in this, although I can't recall. I think it's in the Republic, but it might be in, I don't want to stop the review and look. I think it might be, what is it, Phaedro? But it's in one of the dialogues. I think Socrates says something to the effect of, if men only knew what virtue was, they would do the right thing. And in part one of this book, the man, he's an unnamed protagonist, by the way. That's why I'm not naming him. The man in the underground says, whoever said that was a fool, because I have a friend. And then he goes, don't laugh. You have a friend like this too. And he talks about how people will energetically make these assertions and have these moments of clarity in their mind after some introspection that I really need to change. I'm not living right. I'm not doing the right things. And then he points out how in that moment, they know what the right thing to do is. And what do? In 15 minutes, they go right back into old habits. And it's almost a little bit of, it sounds like he's almost describing in Christianity the concept of original sin a little bit. But it's, and just how after the fall, man's heart got darkened. His intellect didn't get blunted, but his heart sort of did. And his will got weakened. That's what certain theories say. I'm not trying to have a theological discussion at the moment, though. And so it sounds like he's talking about that. And his observations are pretty interesting. And the man from the underground, he'll go over these stories where he was throwing a fit at somebody for next to no reason. He said it started out as spite. He continues throwing this fit, but he realizes halfway through it, he's not even angry. He's turning up the energy to 11 here when he's really at like a 2, and he's just being he's exaggerating everything. He says that's one of his weaknesses. And what I hate to say is, okay, the man from the underground is most certainly painted in an unflattering light in this novel, or in this book, this novel. And the reality is, if we're being honest with ourselves, I'm not saying it's completely congruent, but there are aspects of even myself in some of what he says. And that's the challenge of this novel, that I think where the value of it lies is, so my 20s were abysmal, and I didn't, like I said, I don't share everything with this guy, but there's some things that he says that I can see shadows of that, that I had done something similar. And he makes an example of the men of action just charges in and kind of gets revenge or whatever, but then he points out the man who's a thinker, who's clever, and this man is most certainly, I think he actually is pretty clever. I do think he's genuinely above average intellect, and he's very, very contemplative, but he's also full of himself. He's one of those types of guys his intellect blinds him. And he often speaks about how intellect and reason are actively working against man's will. He uses volition and reason and pits them against each other, which is, hey, that's a real struggle that we face. But anyway, going back to the men of action, he talks about him and how the man of action will just charge in, and he kind of admires that in him, even though it's pitiable because they don't think. But then he points out, the other side of this is the overthinkers. He refers to them as sort of mice men. They're mousy and they just overthink everything. They never get anything done. They paralyze themselves with their intellect. And he almost laments that he has an intellect. That's just the first part of this. The second part is much longer. And I don't know which part I like more. They're both very, very fun to read. And I think they add something to you if you take some time every few pages and just sort of let it percolate, just let it bubble in your thoughts for a bit. So anyway, he gets to telling you a little about some stories. He goes into some stories of his life, and I'm not going to go too much into this because I'm going to keep this short. In fact, I'm only going to go for another minute or two. But in this story, he invites him. He meets up with some old friends after deciding, I've been in the underground too long. I need to actually get out there and do something with my life and see people, maybe experience the world a little bit. I've just been in this self-imposed exile forever. So he starts meeting some people, and even when he likes them, he can't help but feel contempt for them. But what happens is he invites himself to this dinner party. He goes over to his friend's house, and I say friend loosely, but it's more like this guy tolerates the man from the underground. And there's 2 other guests over, and they're old classmates of his. And he invites himself to this dinner party for this other guy that they'd gone to school with, who is now in the military, and he's this distinguished gentleman. I think his name is Zurkov. I'm not going to stop and look. I should have checked before I read this or started talking, but it's too late now. So anyway, he goes to this place after he invites himself awkwardly, and he even knows he's doing this awkwardly. That's what makes this so, it's toe-curlingly embarrassing to read, but if, I have not done that, but I've done something similar, and this was a while ago, and it's one of those moments that burns me. I'll be sitting there thinking at 3 a.m., just lying there, I'm not bothering anyone. And this memory will flash forward like lightning in my mind and remind me of this this moment. And anyway, it's similar to what he does here. And He he invites himself only to find that they're going to this classy kind of restaurant, and he's poor. He's extremely insecure about his wealth, and they try to gently say, "Hey, you don't really want to go, do you?" And he goes, "What? What you don't think I'm good enough to go? You think I'm so poor I can't go? I'll afford it. I'm not asking you to pay for me." He goes off, and he has to go into debt to go through with this because he can't accept that he should have just said no, or even call the next day and say, "Hey, I'm not coming." So he shows up. They changed the time to 6 o'clock. I think it's 6 o'clock when they agreed to 5. And what does he do? He goes in there and he straight up acts like Fyodor Karamazov, a full-on buffoon. He makes a fool of himself and he can't swallow his pride. And what's happening is this distinguished captain that he used to know, he's speaking with this drawl. It's driving the underground man mad. This part, I actually set it down because I was chuckling out loud. And I haven't had that experience reading in some time. So got to give Fyodor Dostoyevsky some props here. But he's speaking with his drawl. And he's just drawing out these words. And so the underground man starts mocking it. For no reason. He just goes there to... war is in his heart. He's just there to stir it up. Just out of spite. He even says this. He's telling you his motives at a very deep level. And so you think he's unhinged, but it's like he can't be unhinged completely because he has an awareness that an unhinged man doesn't have. And yet he's unhinged. You figure it out. When you read this, you will figure it out, I hope. It's very, very fun to read, and it's very enlightening in many ways. I think there's a little bit of the underground man in everyone, and he really does jump at shadows a lot, but he's often correct in his observations. It's sort of like the is-ought problem in philosophy. Descriptive reality versus prescriptions. What are we going to do about it? He's right in some of his descriptions. It's just his prescriptions are wrong. So anyway, at this dinner party, and I'll sum it up and we'll drop it here. He ends up saying, he challenges a dude to a duel, but then chickens out. And they all just start mocking him at this point. It ends with him being mocked. And he's talking about the humiliation of not leaving. He just says, "I know you don't want me here, but I'm staying just to upset all of you." That's the kind of toe-curlingly embarrassment that I can honestly say I've never even come close to that level. But in other ways, in other forms, I think we've all done something so stupidly similar, at least if you're older than 20. So the underground man decides, I'm going to follow them to the place. They end up leaving, these other guys. He follows them to their location the whole way, and he's like, "I'm going to slap the colonel or the captain in the face, this distinguished gentleman. I'm going to slap him in his face, challenge him to a duel, and he has this fantasy in his mind of, I'm going to fire my pistol shot up in the air, get down on my knees, and they'll get down on their knees before me and ask me for forgiveness, and I will forgive them, and they will be so grateful to be in my presence." He's got these delusions of grandeur that just don't abate throughout this novel. I think I'll stop it there. There's a lot more I could say, but people don't watch longer videos, unfortunately. And this is kind of what maybe I will. Yeah, guess what? I am going to keep going. The underground man. It's social media. Social media has increased the rise of the underground men and women. The underground people, the mole people, is everywhere now. There's this disconnect between men and women. I mean, there's a disconnect between the generations. There's a disconnect between political parties, between naturalism and empiricism and theology and theism. And there's so much just madness all about us now. And all these factions and all these people in the underground are sitting there silently seething that they're these genius. If only they could see how great I am. It's it's pervasive. It's everywhere, and it's insane. You know, it's sad. There's a lot of people in the underground right now, but Fyodor Dostoyevsky is making the case. You don't want to be in the underground. And now I'll make the case. I'll argue with Fyodor Dostoyevsky here. I'll say being in the underground, because I spent some time in the underground, I did, and it was good for me. It actually changed. It saved my life. But the thing was, you got to reemerge from the underground. You don't stay in the underground for eternity. It's good to spend some time there. There's a cleansing effect of sorrow and melancholy and grief. But if that becomes you all the time, I mean, it's going to be deleterious, isn't it? Anyway, I think this is just a side effect of empire, which I discuss in my history videos. But anyway, Fyodor Dostoevsky, Notes from the Underground, Penguin Classic Edition, 10 out of 10. You can read it in an afternoon. There's no reason not to. And I highly, highly recommend you do so. By the way, if you are a new reader and you're looking to get into Fyodor Dostoevsky, this is what you want to start with, this book. It's a great introduction. It gives you an idea of what he's like, what he's about. And unfortunately, someone asked me once what they should start with Dostoevsky, and I meant to say Notes from the Underground, but I recommended the wrong book to them. I accidentally said The Idiot, which is, oh, that's nasty of me. I'm sorry. I hope that person enjoys that book if they read it. But I hope they also come back and read this. So anyway, yeah, we'll stop her here. God bless you all. Have a wonderful day.